Okay, we saw testing object-oriented applications, right? So
ಇವುಗಳ
this week,
ಎರಡು ವರ್ಷ ಕೂಡ ಟೀಚರ್.
hello, excuse me. All right, we'll be seeing testing web applications for this week. So we already saw that web applications are way different from the normal applications that we saw. And you all know in what ways web application is different. You all remember in the first unit we saw how web applications are different from normal applications. Can you tell me a few points on that? Someone who remembers that? Excuse me. Yes? Can anyone do it? In what way is a web application different from the rest of the applications?
Uses the internet, ma'am. Uses internet at some point.
Good. It uses internet, meaning any problem with the internet will also affect your web app. Then
Yes,
what
ma'am.
else? What else?
Ma'am, web apps we can access using internet browser. Other apps we have to download and set up, ma'am. Set the program.
All right. So when you have a browser, then the version of the browser, then the version of the plugins that it can support, everything differs, right? So any person can have any kind of a system configuration, a browser configuration, and all these things. So it must be able to support all these things. So to name a few, these are some of the methodologies that we actually saw, which makes the web applications different from the normal applications. Now we'll see how to test the web application. So as it is, if it's a normal application, we saw that we follow the white box testing, black box testing, and all those things. And later on, we saw that how in an object-oriented programming scenario, the testing differed a bit. Now we'll see how we are going to test the web applications and in what aspects are we going to test the web applications. Now, so this is the first slide over here, testing the quality dimension. So what all are you supposed to test with respect to a web application? So here, if you can see, the first one is a content. As you all know, the content is very, very important. So whatever we are going to display on the web page, so that should be verified for correctness. So that is the first thing. Next is the syntactic level, that is how far it is correct with respect to the syntax, spelling, punctuation, grammar, etc. And the semantic level, how far it is correct. Now that you would have written papers or projects for the minor project, now that you would have done all these things for the minor project, you would know that syntax level, that is grammatically also whatever you've written should be right, plus semantic level, the correctness and the consistency of whatever you've written for the paper is also important. And there shouldn't be any ambiguity. It should be completely describing your system. So the same thing applies to the rest of the content as well. Next is a function. So what all functionality is your quality dimension? I mean, is your web app supposed to provide? For example, consider a web app where you are checking for your attendance, your marks, that is our ERP. So what all is required from that? So you'll be checking marks, so that will be one functionality. You'll be checking the attendance, that will be one functionality. So it is with respect to user. With respect to another user, say for the faculty, entering the marks and entering the attendance. So that also becomes another functionality. So care should be taken to check, I mean, to test every function that the web app is able to provide. Next is structure of the web app. So how you have designed your web app, the structure should Usability. So what is usability? So this has to so this is your usability test. So it is important you also test the interfaces, plus you also learn and apply the required navigation syntax and semantics. So it's not only about the content syntax and semantics, we'll also be testing about the navigation, that is moving from one link to another. Is a syntax right? According to whatever the content says, am I moving to that page only? And the semantics, is it giving me the relevant information that it ought to give? So this is what will be tested in the usability test. And next we have the navigability. So navigability will be tested in order to make sure that dead links, improper links, and erroneous links are not present. Plus, whatever link is already present is also leading to the proper data. So that is what we'll be testing in navigability. And performance testing. What is performance? How far your application is able to perform. Something like a response time, something like probably the turnaround time for one transaction. So these will be considered as tests for the performance of a web application. Also, you will be going on into testing the load, the maximum load that your web app can handle, and probably one step more is your stress testing. So you apply the stress and then you get on all these things. There's someone who's scribbling, who's at well. So next is okay. Load testing and responsive, how far the system is responsive to the user interaction. So all these things will be tested in the performance testing. Now after that, you also test the compatibility. Testing compatibility is very important because how far how far your web app is compatible to the various environments that a client could possibly be in. So one important thing that we saw with respect to web apps is that it should be compatible to different browser environments. So as I told you, a client as well as a server is being involved in this. Meaning a server, okay, initially it will be held up in different places, so there's no problem. But then with respect to the client, there is still a problem because not all clients run on the same configuration systems. So that's about your compatibility of client-side application with respect to most possible configurations. Configuration of the system in the sense you'd consider the OS, you'd consider the hardware, you'd consider the browser, you'd also consider the plugins and most things like this. Next is interoperability. So in case if your web app is interfaced with some other application or a database, then when you're testing the web app, you also need to test it not only as a standalone web app, but also as how far it is able to interoperate with the rest of the interfaces. And the next one is a security. So you need to test the security aspect, as we initially said about the web apps being different from the rest of the apps. Since it is online, since it is using the internet, the security threats is also very high. It's so vulnerable that anytime it can fail the security aspects. So you must make sure that penetration testings are done on the web apps, and you should find out how far the security is, how far it is better. Well, it's okay. Now, these are the errors in a web app, and you must make sure that these errors are removed before you can do something about it. You often see a symptom of the error, not the error itself here, because on the client side, you have two different sides of programming here as far as the web apps are considered. One is the client side, the other is the server side. And the client is just like a reporting authority. You just request for something and you receive something, that is all. But then it's the server side which does most of the programming, and if at all an error is found out, it'll only be found out in the client side. You cannot even determine where the error is happening because the processing happens in the server side. So it's only the symptom of the error that we find out, and definitely not the error itself. Because a web app is implemented in different configurations, you need to test the web app in multiple configurations, in multiple combinations and permutations, so that you make sure that every user is able to use a web app without any problem. Because if it's going to be an app, anyway, you will have it installed in your system. Someone will come and they will install it. But unlike in a web app, it is not the case. You just download it and you just use it on the client side. So you should take enough care to make sure that it runs in every environment possible. Although some errors are the result of incorrect design, many errors can be traced to the web app's configuration only. So configuration is very, very important. Testing the configuration is really very, very important. Next is, errors can be difficult to trace across the three architectural layers, that is the client, server, or the network itself. You really don't know where the error is occurring, either in the server or the client or the network. So care should be taken to find out where exactly the error is located, and then you have to correct it. Next is, sometimes it's a static operating environment, or sometimes it's a dynamic operating environment which will be providing the error. So in that case, you have to carefully test with the static operating environment as well as the dynamic operating environment, so that you don't have any problem later on with the web app.
Good morning, ma'am. This is Ashutosh here, ma'am. I joined a little bit late, ma'am. So,
Yeah, good morning, Ashutosh. You have any doubt?
no, ma'am. Just for the attendance sake, ma'am. Just I
All
was
right,
able
all
to
right.
join.
Okay. Next is web app testing strategy. So the content model for the web app, the interface model, design model, user interfaces, and the functional components. So all these things should be tested. So that's the strategy. So whatever we saw earlier, the quality dimensions. So every dimension that is to be tested in the web app should also, I mean, what we learned in the dimensions, so that applies to the strategy. So every possible thing that we learned in the dimension, every dimension of the web app should be tested, and plus the navigation part, the security part, the performance part, the client server, the network part, everything should be tested according to the web app testing strategy. So this is a testing process. This is an important question. Uh, so here, if you can see, so this was a webby pyramid that we saw as early as the first unit, if I'm not wrong. No, the architecture of the web apps. So it was in unit 3, if I'm not wrong. So if you can see, the first level is component design, as you can see. Next, you have the architecture design, then the navigation design, the content design, aesthetic design, and interface design. And it will be connecting the technology with the user through these layers as shown in the pyramid. As you can see, these are some of the testing that must be conducted, which is having a connection with one of the layers of this webby pyramid. So component design will be taking care of the component testing as shown here. Plus, the next level is a navigation design. So that has to be followed by navigation testing. Then you have the content design, which should be followed by the content testing. Then you have the aesthetic design and interface design, which will be tested by the interface testing. Later on, once all these things are complete, once when the system is completely ready, when it is in a working condition, then you go in for testing these three that's given in the circle. The first one is a configuration testing. Is your web app that you've made it ready, working with all possible configurations, at least with most possible configurations, if not all possible configuration. And then you have the performance testing. Is it working with a good turnaround time? Is it working with a good, a request time? So all those things will be tested in the performance testing. And then you have the security testing, where I probably run my web app. I'll host it on a server, and then I'd install a client. I'll try to communicate the client with the server and try to find out if there is any security issues that are relating to the client, server, or the network itself. So this is how the testing process is carried out for web app. And now we'll be looking at each of these kind of testing that's shown over here in detail. So first is the content testing. Content testing has three important objectives. As I told you, syntax is very, very important as a syntax of the content. Next is semantics of the content should be important. So semantics is not only about following the correctness or whatever, but then the completeness of information is also required. For example, if I'm constructing a website for our college conference, then regarding syntax, so whatever I've given should be grammatically right and all those things. So that's not only necessary. I also need to give accurate information, like what is exactly the deadline for paper submission. What is exactly the date when I would probably get the results. And completeness of information is like I would have told somewhere that I will be giving my copyright form, but then due to inconsistency, I'm not uploading the copyright form. So now that becomes a semantic error. To find errors in the organization, a structure of the content that is presented to the end user. Now I would also be checking with the organization policy so that no error is, no content is contradicting with the organization policy and things like that. Next is assessing content semantics. So how will you test the semantics of the content? Is the information factually accurate? So are the facts right? And is the information concise and to the point, or is it elaborately detailing something? Is it discussing on something that it which is not very necessary for the web app currently being considered? And is the layout of the content object easy for the user to understand? You all know how the content is placed inside a web app, right? So normally it is like on top you have the various links within the web app itself for the different pages. For example, if you see a conference website, what is given at the top? You get the links for the deadline, submission link, important dates, then paper submission titles. So all these things you will be having in the top. You will have links for that. So that is how it is generally for every conference, or for that matter. It is not only for our conference that we are going to decide. Next is you will also be checking out for where I can find the exact content. Now below this link, I will be having various information, so that should be tested as well. After this, if you can see, I will be checking if the information embedded can I make a search? Can I just look into it and find it out manually? So all these things are important. And have proper references being provided for all information derived from other sources. If in case it's a website which is probably telling some important information about the COVID-19 affected cases or something like that, have I given the sources of information? Like for example, I would have derived it from the government website. Am I providing that source? Because it's not me who is providing the source. That's again a mislead on what I'm trying to tell. So it's always important to make sure that the sources are also provided. Is the information presented consistent internally and consistent with the information presented in other content objects? Now, in one place, if I'm telling the date of submission is April 22, and in another place, I'm telling the date of submission is April 30, then it is not consistent. So, I should always make sure that whatever data that I'm giving within the web app in different parts of the web app should be consistent with each other. I should tell the same information even if it's going to be in places. Next is the content offensive, misleading, or does it open door to litigation? So is it providing room for any wrongdoing? So that also should be checked. Next is, does the content infringe on the copyrights or trademarks? Am I getting the, the plagiarized image or content from some other source, and I'm just putting that without any reference to the original source? So that is also wrong. Does the content contain internal links that supplement existing content? So it's about checking whether the links are right and getting the supplements, all these things. And aesthetics is also a very important thing that should be noted down, because though it is content, even then the aesthetics of content will be something like the color of the font, then the background color, is it visible properly? All these things are pertaining to the aesthetics of the content. Next is database testing. As you all know, one important thing with web apps is connecting with different third-party applications or connecting with different parts of the same app itself. For example, we were discussing about the smart home system earlier in our class, if you all remember. So in a smart home system, that is an app. Maybe a web app is there so that I can monitor whatever is happening in my home using the smart home system. So that is a web app part. But still, the most important thing is it is connected with a database where probably the readings are stored. Okay, probably the temperature is stored, the passwords, the username, whomever has access to the system, so that is stored. Anyway, it is connected with a database. Plus, there's one more important thing, it is connected to the sensors that provide the input. So it is connected to many different things. It's not the standalone web app that is responsible for, which is supposed to be tested before we deliver it to the users. We have to interface it with all the other applications that it is connected to, like the database, like the sensors, and then we need to perform a testing of the system as a whole rather than just the web app. So here, if you can see, we'll be seeing about the database testing. There are different layers in the database, like the client layer. So that's going to be only the user interface, because as a client, we happen to see only the user interface. We don't know anything that is happening in the server layer. We just give a query, we just get the answer for that. The processing is all done in the server. So in the client layer, only the user interface is important. We only communicate with the server through the user interface. Now, the server layer. So here, if you can see, in the case of the server layer, you have different things. So for the web app, you have the data transformation, you have the data management. So these three different layers you have in the server layer. So for each of these things, you need to test the application. You also have the database layer where the data access is mentioned. If you can see, the database should be tested. Are all the fields correct? Or all the, even when you create a Google form, consider just as small as a Google form. When I create a Google form, I need to test whether it is accepting all the inputs. Like for example, for certain cases, for example, register number, if I make it a number, then you have difficulty in entering your register number fully, because your register number starts with a letter rather than a number. So that has to be taken care of while creating a database. So as it is shown over here. And then you have the data management. How do you manage the data? Probably with SQL and data transformation. Now, when the client requests for the data, that data is taken from the database and it has to be transformed into some other forms that it can be sent back to the client. So how is that data transformation brought about in a web app? And then you have the server layer where for the web app. So how is the connection between the client and server even happening with respect to this interface? So that's through the HTML scripts or whatever scripting language. So what about the client side scripting? What about the server side scripting? All these things has to be taken care of. Next is user interface testing. So how would you test a user interface? So it's important you test the design rules, aesthetics, and related visual content with respect to every user interface. Now, you all know that the interface has to be, you identify the links to different pages by when you place the cursor on that particular text, it will be shown in a different color. It will be shown in, italicized font. It will be underlined. It will be shown in a, different colors. So all these things are important for us to find out if it is leading to an interface. Connecting to something else. Now, unit testing has to be performed on all these interfaces. Now, consider there's one interface where the client communicates with the user. I enter all my information on that particular interface. So that's going to be in the form of a HTML form. Now that should be unit tested, meaning every single field, be tested, whether it is right or wrong. Like if I create a Google form, I need to test whether the first question, I'm sorry, okay, if I'm asking for a name, it should be of a short answer form. If I'm asking which department, it can be an MCQ type because it can take only one answer. Either it should belong to CSE department or MEC or ECE. So MCQ is better. So like that, everything should be unit tested. If I'm giving some other format, then it is wrong. So that should be uncovered during the unit testing of the interface itself. Next, you have to check about the navigational semantic units, which is nothing but NSU. So with respect to one navigational semantic unit, with respect to one functionality, what is the list of all pages as a thread that I follow? And as a semantic unit, how do I test that? So that's also part of the user interface testing. So selected use cases and NSUs can be checked in order to uncover the errors rather than going out with all possible combinations of the user interfaces and the NSUs. And the interface also should be compatibility tested in the sense the compatibility should be tested, which is very, very important. It should be compatible with every possible environment. Next is interface testing mechanism. First, the links should be tested. Then the forms should be tested. So that's what we told about in the unit testing. Then the client-side scripting, the dynamic HTML, which creates the result pages, the client-side pop-up windows. So all these things should be tested. In the sense, you can't test a client-side pop-up window just like that. You need to make sure that the forms are filled in with those kind of information such that the client-side pop-up window is created. Then you will also be testing the interface with the CGI scripts. That's a common gateway interface scripts. So that is for testing how is a web server interacting dynamically with the users from the client side. Then about the streaming content. So if some information is ready in the database, it should push the data rather than me giving a query and then pulling the information from the database. So this is called as a push technology. And nowadays it is like this push technology is very famous in with respect to the search engines. If you can see in your mobile browsers, even without you asking for certain information, a list will be displayed based on your preferences, previous preferences. This is called as a push technology. And next is cookies. So cookies also has to be taken care of because that's the important way in which a server communicates with the, a client communicates with the server. And application specific interface mechanisms are important because not all applications will have all possible interfaces. For example, as it is shown here, if I'm creating a web app like for online shopping, then I need to create interfaces for shopping cart where I can include all the items that I want to purchase, and a methodology where I can make online payment, for example, credit card or debit card or any other online transfer, and then shipping cost calculator. So these are application specific interfaces that you will be having, and it will not be possible for every possible application. So the rest of the things that we saw is for all possible applications, and other than that, you'll also have certain application specific interfaces that are designed particularly to cater to the needs of certain applications. Next is usability test. So what is usability test? I told you in the beginning of the class, usability test is something like a validation test that is performed by the user. So you need to test a sequence in the sense the usability category should be defined, and you are supposed to identify the goals, then design the tests that will be required in order to find out if a goal is reached. And these goals are nothing but the requirements that were specified by the users or the customers and the initial level when we started, before even we could start working with the web app. Next is select the participants or the group of participants, the users, end users, the different categories of end users who will be conducting the tests. Then instrument participants' interaction with the web app while the testing is conducted, because you need to know whether the user is a novice user or a very well accomplished user. So for both these category of users, is your web app easy to use? So that's a main part of the usability test. Then develop a mechanism for assessing the usability of the web app as well. Next is different levels of abstractions you're supposed to test the usability. Number one, a form. So how is the form being done? For example, a Google form. So is it getting all the possible information that is required? Then the complete web page. Next, as a complete web page, I will be checking it. Now only a form I'll be checking in the beginning, and then as a complete web page, now this is like integrating. Different forms will be there in a web page, and probably I'm testing all those things together as such. And then the usability of a complete web app. Now first in the form level, then as a web page level, and then in the web app level will be tested. And next is compatibility testing. So here, if you can see, I will be test the compatibility of my web app across the different configurations of systems on the internet. So it's important to identify each computing platform, the devices, browsers, operating systems, internet connection speeds, service providers, all these things are important. Now, compatibility validation tests will also be provided, and they will be taking care of the interfaces, navigation, performance, and security tests. So all these things should be taken care of during the compatibility testing. Next is component level testing. So here I will be testing the component of the web app. So what kind of components will be there? Conventional black box, white box methods should be used in order to do this. Then the test case design will be including equivalence partitioning, boundary value analysis, and path testing, so that I cover all the path, so that I test for all the input values. So that's important for the component levels. The next is a navigation testing. As you all know, navigation should be tested, the link should be tested, the redirect should be tested. Now, for example, if I am clicking on a page and that page is still not constructed, site under construction, something like that, page under construction, something like that should be given. Any redirect from a page should be appropriately mentioned, and then bookmarks facility should be enabled. Then the frames and frame sets, the size, the download performance, the browser's compatibility for the frames and frame sets should be tested, and make sure that a sitemap is drawn where the different pages of the website are there and how it is connected. Is it leading to an end, dead end, or something like that? Is there any page which is not having any in link that it can never be reached? something like that has to be tested, and for that a sitemap is important. And internal search engines are very, very important. Now, if I click on something on the internal search engine, it should take me to that particular page. And the next thing is navigational semantic units. Now, is it without error? Is it without any problem? So that also has to be tested. Is all the mechanism being tested? And is the functionality of the NSU, because NSU is something that that tests for a functionality, and is that functionality proper? So if at all I give a back arrow, where is it moving? If I click on a particular link, is it opening on a new page, or is it opening on the same page on the on a different tab, or is it